Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Girls, and Purrs. My name's Leslie, and today I'm going to have my June and July wrap up. I'm combining them because just my schedule got a little bit crazy, and in June I tackled a lot of books, so I spent more time trying to create videos that broke up the material so I didn't have one giant video, and that just really set me behind. I have a lot of books to cover for my wrap up, so I'm going to try to go through this quickly and hopefully coherently so that this video isn't super long. Alright, so in June I read either books by Octavia E Butler or books about Octavia E Butler, and I read two that are about Octavia E Butler. Yeah. And the first one is Star Child. Oh no, you know what? I don't want to talk about that one yet. You see, I'm already messing up. Let me talk first about A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky by Linnell George, The World of Octavia E Butler. I'll hold both of these up because these are both biographies. Lord, here we go. These are both biographies. And what should I say? This is just straightforward prose, but this isn't necessarily your traditional biography where you're reading like a straightforward narrative about the author. It's not a from beginning of life to end of life. This is about the author examining materials that Octavia E Butler has in her life, and then writing thoughts about the headspace of Octavia E Butler, what influenced her to write the material that she did. And so this is largely a focus on Octavia E Butler's writing life. That's probably the better way to put it. I'd want to say this reminds me of like an investigative piece, but you're not reading like the final, how should I say, the final news piece. Instead, you're actually seeing like the investigative part unfold. So, for example, there's a lot of photos in here. So there'll be like a photo of something that belonged to Octavia Butler. Like here's a typewriter ribbon. Somewhere in here there's also like library cards, or there's pieces of papers with scribble on it. I mean, I've also seen receipts in here. Here's water and power bills. So I really enjoyed this book, but this is also because I'm a fan of Octavia E Butler. I don't know if someone that isn't familiar with her would really be entertained by this, but I enjoyed it. And to top off that, there's Star Child. And I'd have to say that between The World of Octavia E Butler, A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, and Star Child, I actually found Star Child more informative, which is really surprising because if you look at the two books, the first one I talked about is like, it's thicker. Hopefully you can see that better. And this is just so thin. I thought I was going to breeze right through this. I did. I just also thought that I wasn't going to, I don't know, learn as much or feel as impacted as A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, which I still do love, but I felt like the material in Star Child was more impactful. And this is almost like this literary conversation between the author and Octavia Butler, and not directly, but indirectly through the structure of the prose and poetry, because what the author does in here is she does examine the history and life of Octavia E Butler, and I learned a lot about Octavia's family, her I believe parents and grandparents, if I'm correct? And what their life was like leading up to Octavia's birth, their migration from Louisiana to California, and what was going on politically in the world, what was going on in history, what were like the big milestones. And then from there, this is all sectioned off. So you'll learn some information in a straightforward prose, and then it'll be followed by a poem. And there's something about that that really just puts what we just learned historically into perspective. And so I think that's really beautiful. For instance, we see that there's like a picture of Octavia as a child. I think this is like the youngest photo that is on record with her mother. And then it talks about what her mother did, what her father did. And after that, it'll say, daughter of dust. And then there'll be a poem about what we just read. And I thought that was just so well put together. And it's just very organized to make the experience seamless. And by the end, oh, you know what? This is what I noticed. I'm so glad I stumbled upon this because I didn't mark it. In this book, on page like 57, there's the very same photo of, what do you call it? The book binder cover that was also in A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky. And so I actually really liked reading this section because I enjoyed seeing, or yeah, reading both authors' interpretation of material. I thought that was really cool. And so yeah, I like that. And for instance, we learn about a period of time in history when there was a fear of communism. And those moments are just so important to kind of evaluate and really understand also what Octavia E. Butler was talking about in her science fiction, because there's so many things that she wrote that are relevant about what's going on today, because honestly all the issues have never been remedied, but also a lot of the issues are just like history repeating itself and could easily been about other past times and historical events, and yet unfortunately they're timeless as of today. So what I really loved at the very end was that the author had met Octavia E. Butler, and Octavia just commented how poetry kind of just makes things clear and in perspective. I'm like paraphrasing here. It said more eloquently here, but I just loved at the end that we get that. So yeah, I like both of those. I'd have to say out of both of them, they're both really good. But as far as like learning material about Octavia E. Butler, this is the one to go with. About her life, I'd say. All right, and the next book is not written by Octavia E. Butler, but it's a nod to Octavia E. Butler, and it's all these different science fiction writers, or I should say writers writing science fiction. So it's an anthology. It's called Octavia's Brood, which is a nod to the next book I'm going to talk about, Lilith's Brood. And on the back it says, whenever we envision a world without war, without prisons, without capitalism, we are producing visionary fiction. Organizers and activists envision and try to create such worlds all the time. And so this is focused on science fiction stories from social justice movements. I absolutely love this book. This was absolutely riveting. I enjoyed every single author's approach to science fiction because it's so vast in definition that there's just so much room for authors to play. And yeah, I just think that this is definitely worth picking up. All right. This is a big one. So I read Lilith's Brood, which is actually 3 books repackaged and published as such. I think it was published originally in the late 80s. The first book was Dawn, the second was Adulthood Rights, and the third one is Imago. I've already done so many videos for each one, and I'm trying to make sure I summarize this coherently. So how do I start? I'll start with Dawn and kind of jump off from there. So the first book, Dawn, sets up what's going on in the world. Earth is on like the brink of complete destruction due to war and just ecological damage that humans have done to the earth. Some aliens swoop on in, grab all the viable humans, put them in like this hibernating state so that they can recover, and also rehabilitates Earth. Once these aliens think that Earth can be re-inhabited, they wake up people, and that's where our book starts with Lilith. And Lilith is woken up. They feel like she's like the best candidate to help lead a mission, which is just getting other humans prepared to go back to Earth and be prepared that Earth is different. Earth had to change in order for it to continue and survive, and ultimately at some point flourish. The caveat is that these aliens consider themselves traders. They go around the universe trading. What that really means is that they just breed with other species. Their survival depends on it. And so this is the proposal. Lilith has to agree, and others have to agree to this to ensure Earth and humanity's survival. And so the books go on from there, and it really, all three of them discuss what are humans willing to do to survive, to thrive. How does evolution take place, and what are we going to sacrifice for evolution? Another larger conversation intermingled with all this is consent. I'd have to say my major issue with this book is that I can't tell sometimes. I'm not sure how to put this. Clearly, Octavia wrote this, and so she created certain problems on purpose, right? But I just can't tell what is a larger story she's trying to tell. I know she's having conversations about like the issues with humanity, the violence that we impose on ourselves that ultimately leads to our destruction. But what I don't understand fully is if she's also trying to look at the aliens as a way to talk about colonialism in a way. I can't tell if me as a reader is overthinking it or not. And I have, since reading these, watched other BookTube reviews. The chats are really long because there's so much to discuss, and I don't really have a definitive answer, and I haven't found an interview where my question is really addressed by the author. So maybe I'm overthinking it, I'm not sure. But if you've read this, I'd love to have a chat. I definitely had like a spoiler section to talk about this because there's just so much to talk about. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. That's basically what encompasses all three books. The other two, they're after Dawn, are about hybrid beings and their survival and their decisions. And it just really just piggybacks on, about the same conversation, so I don't want to go into it too much. But yeah, this is also worth a read. I still think my favorite book by this author is Kindred. I still enjoyed this. I just felt like I had more questions that were more about what the author was trying to say. I don't know. It was like a little bit confusing. So that's why I think I didn't love this book as much. But when you read these, it's one of those books that I think is really good for a book club because it lends to conversation. So yeah. Who's that? Even though I focused on Octavia Butler, every once in a while, each month I'll like sneak in a thin book or a comic book, just to kind of like break up what I'm reading. So I read Flawed. This is a comic book. It's the first volume in the series. It's by, it says, oh my gosh, what's the name? Written by Chuck Brown, art by Prenzi, I guess. This author also wrote Bitterroot, which I have not read yet. I really do want to. This book is about a therapist, a psychologist. Basically, that's her day job, but at night she fights crime. I love that this is a female protagonist. I love that I'm reading a story where it's not about a reluctant hero. I'm tired of the reluctant hero thing. I'm reading about someone that has made a decision about what to do with their life and is very proactive. There's something about that that I just found so refreshing. But I would say, if you're fine with violence, go ahead and read this. It was too violent for me, which is not the comic book's fault. It says that it says exactly what it is on the back, and I don't know, I just thought I'd be fine with it, and I wasn't. So truly don't let that like stop you. If you're interested in this, please read it. Ultimately, this character fights crime and then learns about the dark supernatural underbelly within her community. Something that I want to say like shorthand is I think of Batman in a way, but just minimally, just very minimally, just as a quick reference so that you'll kind of have something to connect the material to in case you might be interested. I definitely think it's worth a read. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And so yeah. So that's all the books for June. I'd also like to say Octavia's Brood was so good. I just want to say that one more time. It's definitely worth a read. I had that on my shelf for so long. It had collected dust, and I'm so mad that I hadn't read it earlier. Alright, so for July, I read 2 books that were not focused on the author that I was supposed to read, and the first one is called They Call Me Whirl by David Bowles. This is a poetry collection. It's geared to ages 9 through 12. I picked it up. I was ordering some things from my local bookstore, and this was on their website actually, and it just piqued my interest because of the material. It talks about this 12-year-old boy who's, you know, going into middle school, so it's a bit of coming of age. He's white, Mexican American, so this does deal with colorism. He lives on a borderland, so it also talks about that borderland life. And you get to see all the beautiful, happy moments from a child's point of view. And then you could kind of see that he's starting to grapple with his identity, his religious beliefs, the oppression and racism that goes on within his own community. And I thought it was at times very funny and silly, and hopeful in a way that I feel like this book of that's focused on this age can be. And I feel like, you know what, even though I'm adult, I like to read that too. I like to read a little bit of hope and humor infused in a narrative. And so I really found this absolutely lovely, and I'm glad I read it, even though it's geared for a younger age. And also it's poetry, but it's very easily digest because it's the target audience is ages 9 through 12. And I loved it. I really felt like it was worth the read. So yeah, I hope you pick this up either for some younger kids or for yourself. I also think that I didn't learn about a couple of people in history that I hadn't known about, so I marked those. I have bookmarks, so at some point I'll read about those real life people in history. I also picked up Sana Sana, Latinx Pain and Radical Visions for Healing and Justice. This is an anthology, nonfiction essay collection. I did like reading this, but it's very heavy. It's very, very heavy. So proceed with caution. Make sure you look up trigger warnings before you pick this up. What I did like about this book, in terms of kind of picking back off of the fact that it's heavy, is there's a confessional style to these essays. There's a lot of vulnerability from the writers, releasing their pain onto the pages so that we as a reader can take that in and either feel seen or empathize as part of like the healing experience that these authors are going through. And one of them that we really enjoyed was just how there's an author in here that talks about not really feeling connected to their culture, and that's just generations of colonialism that has taken place, and in adulthood trying to find their way back to their culture. And I thought that was really beautiful, and it's something that so many people can connect to over time. So yeah, I really like this. And on the back it says, vision and understanding of Latinidad is broad and expansive. It centers Black, Indigenous, queer, trans, and feminist Latinidades by advancing an unapologetically radical, anti-racist, anti-capitalism, feminist, and queer politic. Sana Sana holds creative and defiant space for identifying economic, social, political, and emotional and spiritual strategies to forge individual and collective healing and justice. So this is definitely a book where I felt like, once again, I'm being introduced to all these different authors that I'm now interested in. So it's really just feeding my reading habit. All right. So for July, my focus was on Carmen Maria Machado. I only read 2 books by her. I think she has maybe 2 more that I'm not familiar with, that at some point I'll read. So I'm trying to figure out which one to talk about first. Her Body and Other Parties. This is a collection of stories written by the author. They're dark, they're psychological, they're really suck you in. There's something about her prose, particularly in this story, that has like a cinematic quality. And I think I would attribute that to not just how well the prose flow, but also the imagery that the author presents. That really just sucks you in. All right, I'm sorry, I had to let my cat out. All right, this book really focuses on women's self-hatred and violence they impose on themselves, or society does, and also how that gets passed down generationally, and also to just all women in different facets. And so there's like an element of, I want to say, body horror to this, that I don't think I've read anything quite like that. So I really enjoyed this. I did enjoy In the Dream House more, which I'll talk about next. Okay. In the Dream House is Carmen Maria Machado's memoir. I absolutely love this. Out of all the books, I think this was the most riveting. I hybrid read this. The audio I think was like 4 hours. I didn't put this down. I read it. I read it through the night until the next day. And I just want to say, how do I say this? This memoir is told in like a very creative, not traditional way of a biography or anything like that. The story is told in vignettes, and in each vignette it's tackling a different genre in order to tell the author's story. And this is very much focused on one aspect of the author's life, and that's a time when she was in an abusive relationship, emotionally and psychologically. And so that's where her choice to use varying genres in order to talk about our experience is so effective. There is one story where the author uses something like In the Dream House as a sci-fi thriller, and when I read that, it's like only a couple of pages, 4 pages max, but it reminded me of the movie Scream, and of just receiving a telephone call, but instead of it being someone that's trying to murder you, it's a spouse that's being emotionally, verbally, mentally abusive over the phone. And it was just so incredibly effective, the way she strikes such a tone that's just so like tense. And ultimately, the dream house is not just a place for the author to talk about this as a literal place where her relationship took place, but symbolically the ideal that she had for herself in a relationship. But then once she has it, excuse me, once she has it, we then have to look closer at the symbolism of that abusive relationship and the foundation of that house. What is it made up of? It's society's pressures, stereotypes, colorism, racism. What made the author feel that once she was in this relationship, that was a bar. That's what she deserved, and that's what she's exploring in this book. And I just thought it was so beautifully told. And so yeah, of all the books, I'd honestly say this is the one where I'd say pick it up, run, don't walk, and start reading it, because it was just so good. So yeah, those are all the books that I read. I was almost coherent through the whole thing for the month of June and July. The next 2 months, I'm going to do the same thing, where I'm going to have just a combo of 2 months. So August and September are going to be talked about probably by the end of September or something like that. Anyways, if you liked any of these, let me know. Please let me know what you think about Lilith's Brood. I don't know anyone that's read those, so I've just been watching BookTube and still trying to find an answer to my questions that I have. So thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts, and I will talk to you later.